To this day, I get people saying, this is blasphemy. I'm on my chosen videos. I get people saying, this is blasphemy because there's the likeness of Jesus. Oh man. Stop. Stop it. We're not making Jesus into a fish. He looked like a man. He was a man. Okay? Well, hello, all of my friends out there in internet land. Welcome back to Embrace the Question. We're doing our Bible study with me. We're in Exodus chapter 20. We're halfway through. It's a long book, and there's so much there. There's so much imagery, so much stuff that's vital for our understanding of the New Testament, the New Covenant. So when John introduces everything and he starts to say things like, the law came through Moses, but grace and truth through Jesus Christ. What does it really mean when the law came through Moses? Well, we are in chapter 20 being one of the most famous chapters. I'm sure you have all read this at one point in your life, maybe, likely, many times. But do we really understand what we're reading when we read through Exodus 20, because this is the giving of the 10 Commandments. And there's so much stuff here to know that isn't readily apparent. So let me start with that, what you might not know, which is this being a covenant. I love the study of covenant. Covenant started with Adam, and there's not a lot of information on the Adamic covenant other than we know there was one, because later on through the prophet God says Adam broke my covenant. Okay, well, so there was a covenant. We can probably guess most of it. We do know that Abraham, we've already covered Genesis in Bible study with me, we know that Abraham was a covenant man with God. So there's definitely a lot about covenant we can study with Abraham. And that's a covenant of faith, one that we call Abraham the father of the faith. That's because he started a faith covenant. And not only that, but he got to watch God fulfill both parts of the covenant, God's part and Abraham's part. Okay, so that covenant's still enacted. Why are we doing another covenant? Because we have had a people for the last 400 years completely enslaved, and they don't know God very well, and they're already struggling. Even though they're free of the Egyptians, they're already struggling, right? They're in the wilderness, but they are having a really hard time, and it's a faith problem, because they can pick up their manna and eat their quail in 1 minute, and the next minute somebody gets bitten by a snake and they start yelling, why does God hate us? So you see there's a problem with the relationship, and nowhere will it be more apparent than this chapter. So while we're on covenant though, let's talk about the parts of a covenant, because we're going to see some of those here. One of them is the preamble. Who am I? Well, that's how this chapter starts, is an introduction from God. That's the preamble. The second part is a prologue. Prologue comes in as a bit of a backstory, a little bit of background. A lot of times you'll see it as, and Moses was really good at these. He would say stuff like, we all came from the original 70 that came out of Canaan into Egypt. And it was kind of regal speak, and it got put into the covenant. We're not going to see that in this chapter, but we will see it, I think, probably between this chapter and chapter 24, because all of this kind of gets spread out a little bit with this covenant. The next part are the stipulations. That's the rules. In this case, 10 Commandments. Here's what we do if we're going to be partakers of this covenant. All right. Next are the sanctions. Sanctions are blessings and curses. Here's what you get with this covenant. These are the blessings of keeping the covenant. This is the benefits you get from the covenant. And then the curses. Here's what happens if you don't. We really see these outlined in Deuteronomy 11, where God splits the people, puts half on one mountain, Mount Gerizim, and the curses mountain over on Mount Ebal. And we read all the blessings from this mountain, and we read all the curses from this mountain. And it's a big deal because by then, everybody knows God's not messing around. Curses are bad. These are for real. We want to avoid these. These are the sanctions, the blessings, the curses, the benefits, the penalties. Okay? Next are the witnesses. And that usually comes through as God saying, or Moses saying, I call as a witness heaven and earth today against you, that you said you would abide by this covenant. So a witness, heaven and earth has seen. Okay? Witnesses. And the next and final piece of the covenant document would be the documentation itself. What are these written on? These are written on stone tablets. And we always see it when Moses comes down from the mountain and he's got both stone tablets, right? He's got the first 5 commandments here and the second 5 commandments here. But that's not really what would have happened in all likelihood. See, it would have been all 10 here and all 10 here. Moses carrying the people's copy in one hand and God's copy in another hand. And they're going to store those copies that each party possess, going to store those in the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so pretty cool, I think. With that known, we can start with Exodus chapter 20 and see if we can identify these. All right, Exodus chapter 20. Let's begin. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. There's a little bit of both there, the preamble and the prologue, because you're seeing, I am the Lord your God, preamble. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. That is a very brief prologue, okay? It's not much of a backstory. You might say that Moses was more verbose with backstory than we're getting here. Okay, but there they both are. Now, we're going right into these stipulations of the covenant. Verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Okay, so you're going to see that the first 5 of these are geared towards how we treat God. The second 5 of these are geared towards how we are to treat each other. Make sense? So this is how God is structuring his rules, his stipulations for this covenant. Now, you shall have no other gods before me. Easy one. You will not make yourself any carved image or likeness of anything that is in heaven above or earth beneath. We took that and we ran with it to such an extent because we needed to. We came from a place, and I say we, this was given to the Jews. This was never given to Christians. This was never given to me. This was never given to you unless you were approximately 3,500 years old at this point. Okay, if you were there, then this was given to you. A covenant for Moses and his people at that time. All right, it lasted for a long time, lasted until the new covenant. These are going to seem very harsh, and you will not make yourself any carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or earth beneath. Why, again, are we doing this? It's because we have been 400 years captive to a people who made images of gods that did not exist or were demonic in nature. Right? That's the problem here. So God is trying to wean them off of the carved image. And it wasn't just the Egyptians that did that. We all know that. All the Syrophoenician, the Sumerian peoples, all of these carved images and worshipped them. We know that later Dagon would be a large statue and he would keep falling over in his temple and literally his head and his hands would break off. That's what people did. That's what pagans did with their gods. They created them and they worshiped them. And a lot of times they were representative of demonic entities. So not making less of that than what it is. God is saying, stop it. Stop doing that. Stop. And there's another side of that coin, which is you are already in my image. Stop making me what I am not. Okay? And this is a huge point of interest because literally denominations and religions have formed out of this doctrine, this teaching, because we all have a different opinion on what in the world does this mean exactly. So interesting. No gods before me. Don't make carven images. And to this day, I get people saying this is blasphemy. That I'm on my chosen videos. I get people saying this is blasphemy because there's the likeness of Jesus. Oh man. Stop it. We're not making Jesus into a fish. He looked like a man. He was a man. Okay? We're not making him something he wasn't. We are portraying him for the purpose of the gospel, but we are not doing this. Okay? Not that we are under this law anymore either. So there's so many facets to this to pay attention to. Don't make carved images, he says. Now next, you shall not bow down, verse 5. Don't bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. I want you to know that this was repealed by God. This is an odd thing. I'm going to visit the iniquity of your fathers on your children, meaning if the child has blindness or leprosy, the child is a leper, then maybe it's because of his sin or his father's sin, which is why they asked Jesus. His disciples asked him 1,500 years after this. They asked him, is this man blind because of his sin or his father's sin? Jesus said, no, it's not that. It's not that anymore. But they still believed it. They still believed it. We'll read about a man named Simon the leper that Jesus had dinner with, who was a Pharisee. Well, guess what? You can't be a Pharisee and be a leper. The Pharisees don't allow lepers because lepers meant you are under the judgment of God. I'm getting weather notifications all the time. So you're under the judgment of God. You can't be a Pharisee. So this man was either healed by Jesus and then became a Pharisee, or was a Pharisee and then developed leprosy and was no longer a Pharisee. So again, this helps you understand a little bit of what they thought by the time Jesus was walking on the earth, what kind of mindsets he had to deal with. So he repealed this. God repealed this by the time of the prophets. He said, no longer will the children suffer for the sins of their fathers. But for right now, this is the rule. While you're coming out of this bondage mindset. This is the rule. Okay? But I'm going to show steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. He's trying to really get them on the right track. And it's a very physical, behavioral set of rails that he's putting them on. You can say, well, is that really that important to him? I think it was very important to them more so than him, and he knew it. Let's go on with verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord you will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Okay. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy, to keep it holy. And listen, verse 8 is a big one. It's one of the shortest, but one of the most controversial. Even in Jesus' day, he was constantly being bombarded by those who thought he was profaning the Sabbath. And he makes the famous statement that the Sabbath was not made. Man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. Revolutionary idea, right? What does it mean to keep the Sabbath day holy? This became a point of huge contention. What does it mean? That's why we start with 10 commandments and we end up with over 600. Because what does it mean to do these things? It could go either way, and we'll talk about that some more as we go. But he's going to expound here, verse 9. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do no work. You or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. You're going to shut it down. And if you've been to Israel, you know they shut it down on the Sabbath. There's not much that goes on. Shops are closed. You better have your food in your house because you're not going to go down to the grocery store and get any. They take this very seriously. Okay? Verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. All right. Now we're going to start the 5 that are, how do we treat our neighbor? Verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. I find this one interesting because there is a blessing, the blessing of honoring your origin. Honor the origin. He who honors a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive what? A prophet's reward. If I honor a prophet, I get a prophet's reward. If I honor the source, I'll receive a reward from that source. If I honor my source, my parents, I get the reward that they offer, which is life. Okay, they gave me life, and by honoring them, I received more life. It's interesting, isn't it? Now, that's a rule of thumb. Doesn't mean that things don't happen that influence people. We all know nice guys that honored their parents that died early for whatever reason. So honor your father and your mother, and it will give you long life. You shall not murder. Yours may say, thou shalt not kill. You get everybody that says, okay, war is wrong, even though God sent people to war. No, it translates, you shall not murder. That's the better translation. Thou shalt not commit adultery. We're going to learn that, the penalty for breaking these is death. It's curses. It's stoning. It's execution. It's not good stuff, right? But Jesus comes along and they throw the adulterous woman at his feet. I just taught this today to my Ugandan audience. They throw the adulterous woman at his feet and he will not condemn her. He says, where have your accusers gone? She says, they've all left, Lord. He says, I'm not going to condemn you either. Just stop it because somebody's going to kill you. And that's the shift from covenant to covenant. Okay? This covenant is very much on a behavioral-oriented rails. Okay? It's necessary to bring people out of this very physical state they've been in over the last 400 years. So don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal. Verse 16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Oh, we see that all through, right? We pin our neighbor by bearing false witness. We trump up charges against them to get them killed. That's exactly what Ahab and Jezebel did to Naboth to get him killed. They created this false witness, and they had him murdered as a result. Don't do that. Verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant or his female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything that is your neighbor's. Again, it's all about how to treat your neighbor. And verse 19, now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood afar off. Wouldn't you? I mean, this is something they have never, you can't get used to this, right? It's like standing at the foot of a live, active volcano. You can't get used to it. It just, there's supernatural stuff going on all the time. You can't figure out what's going on, and you're just terrified. All right, but it leads to verse 19, which is perhaps the most tragic verse in all of the Old Covenant. Here it is. And said to Moses, all the people say to Moses, you speak to us, and we will listen. Don't let God speak to us, lest we die. This is a problem. Why? Because they are the ones that are supposed to be a nation of priests. Priests are supposed to be able to hear from God and convey to the world. That's the arrangement. That was the intent, is to make you a holy nation, a sanctified nation of priests, so that I can reach and bless the world. That was what he said to Abraham, right? And now his priests are saying, we don't want to hear from God. You do it, Moses. We will live vicariously through you, my friend, because we don't have the courage to go up on that mountain. You do it. It's a problem. It's a huge problem. And it became worse and worse. This is, by the way, the rejection, and what leads ultimately to God's need to create the priesthood, which are a bunch of Levites, right? It's people that will at least go into the Holy of Holies once a year. All right. They never really achieved, even the Levites never achieved the face-to-face familiarity with God that Moses did, even though that's what God wanted. Crazy, isn't it? So Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. He's trying to say, calm down. It's going to be okay. But verse 21, the people stood far off. And there it is. There's the reality. They're standing far off. They don't want to come closer. They're petrified. They can't get a handle on the faith aspect of this relationship. And there's a lot we can talk about with covenant that covenant begs intimacy. It begs it. It is the most intimate relationship you can have with another individual. And it is, by the way, really the only way that God interacts with people. Covenant. It is a swapping. Covenant is by nature a swapping of self. You might think, well, covenant's a lot like contract. No, contract is actually so much different, because contract is based on mistrust. The only reason we sign contracts is because I can't trust you to pay me back, so sign this contract. Or vice versa. Covenant, completely different. We enter into a relationship where I swap self with you And then from now on, what happens to you happens to me. What happens to me happens to you. If it happens to one of us, man, it's happened to all of us. We're all coming after you. And that's what God would say all the time. You can't mess with my anointed. I've got them. The whole Balaam, Balak thing. You can't curse them because I've blessed them. There's nothing you can do. They belong to me. I am them. They are me. And that's why Jesus gets into the covenant speak of saying, you eat my flesh and drink my blood. Then I am in you and you are in me. We reside in each other. We are one. We have communion. It's all covenant, which is this is a hard sell for a people that are bound up in Egypt for 400 years. It's just a hard sell. All right. Verse 22. And the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you've seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold. All right. This one's interesting. An altar of earth you shall make for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. Verse 25, if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones. For if you wield your tool on it, you have profaned it. Okay, so what is he saying? He's saying our visitation it's got to be pure. You cannot try to embellish on it yourself. Anything you try to make an altar of, an altar is where you and I are going to meet. It's where we're going to visit in a manner of speaking. It's the altar where you and I are going to have communion. And when we do that, if you are trying to make a fancier altar than, say, your neighbor, that is polluting this with your attempt to be better. Let's leave it alone and make an altar an altar. It's got to be natural. It's got to be what I have given you and not modified by you. Earth or uncut stones. Don't embellish it. Don't put yourself into it. Don't put your stamp on it. We really want to do that. We want to make things so special because it comes from me. But really, no, don't do that. Leave it alone. Otherwise, it profanes it. Verse 26, and you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness be not exposed on it. This one's tough, and it's not talked about a lot in the commentary. But there's a thing about, let's just call it holiness and wholesomeness when approaching God. God doesn't have a problem with your nakedness. He made you. Adam and Eve were naked. So it has something to do with the respect of approaching his throne when you don't know who you are. And that's the plight that Israel finds themselves in the desert. They don't know who they are. So they don't know how to be respectful. They don't know how to approach God in the right way because they just couldn't embrace the relationship. So later, God makes some very specific rules for priests about wear your underpants, for Pete's sakes. When you have a robe on and you come into my tent of meeting, wear your underwear. Not kidding. Not kidding. And again, it's not because God doesn't know what naked people are like. It's because there is something to be said for clean on the outside and clean on the inside. Clean on what can be seen and clean on what can't be seen. That's why we have an Ark of the Covenant that's gold on the outside and gold on the inside. Now, Jesus came out in a rant against the teachers of the law and the Pharisees He said, on the outside, you're like clean cups. You're like, your cup is clean on the outside, but on the inside, it's like a sepulcher. It's full of dead men's bones. It's the same principle. You guys are used to putting up a good outer face, but on the inside, it's just lip service. The inside, you don't really care. You're going to worship me with your lips, but not with your heart. That's the idea. Whew. So that's Exodus 20 in a nutshell, right? Trying to get all the glare off. So it takes a while to get through that because there's so much there. You would think, just read the 10 Commandments and be done with it. No, that's what we've done all our lives, and we're missing the point. So we need to pay attention to this stuff and kind of understand what and why. But I hope you enjoyed it. I sure did. It's always good to reread it and to remind ourselves of why that stuff happens and what are the parts of a covenant. Before you go, I want to ask you to visit the blog. The blog is where a lot of stuff goes down. I've been sharing a lot more lately. So if you haven't checked it out, I think you really enjoy it. There's some freebies on there for you as well that I think you would enjoy. Also, grab yourself some Solway coffee because you know the drill. This is going to help a people group that desperately needs healing. They need the gentle touch of God to bring them back to a place where they can feel valued again. They really need that. And that's what even buying a bag of coffee beans helps facilitate that. So I encourage you to do that. And listen, leave a comment. Tell me what you think. I really love and appreciate all of you guys that watch this channel. And I bless you in Jesus' name. See you next week. Peace out.